the silent observer. The War Council chamber aboard the Dominion's Pride buzzed with the sounds of 12 different species arguing. Commander Zektar's massive form dominated the center of the room, his black chitin armor gleaming under the harsh lights. His 4 arms gestured at the holographic star map floating above the table while he spoke in his native tongue, a series of sharp clicks and hisses that the translation devices converted to galactic standard. The Devourer fleet grows. Stronger each day? Zektar announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered 3 star systems. My intelligence reports show they have consumed the Theta colonies completely. Every living thing turned into biomass for their war machines. Around the oval table, representatives from the other species nodded or made their own species equivalent of agreement. High Admiral Kixthul of the Zenthari floated in his water tank, his tentacles writhing as he processed the information. The Keth delegation, tall and thin like walking trees, creaked softly as they swayed. Even the mechanical nexus units flickered their optical sensors in what passed for concern among their kind. In the corner of the room, almost forgotten by the others, sat Captain Sarah Chen. She was small compared to most of the other representatives, wearing a simple blue uniform that looked plain next to the ornate armor and ceremonial robes of the alien delegates. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she held a basic tablet in her hands, occasionally making notes. Sarah had been sitting there for 3 hours and had not spoken once. The human contributes nothing as usual, muttered General Vex of the Thrakari, his red eyes glowing with disdain. His translator made his words sound like gravel being crushed. Perhaps their species should remain silent while real warriors plan this war. A few other delegates made sounds of agreement. Humans were the newest members of the Galactic Coalition, having joined only 5 years ago when their primitive radio signals were finally detected by Zenthari scouts. Their technology was laughably simple. They still used chemical rockets and projectile weapons. Their entire fleet consisted of maybe 200 ships, most of which were converted cargo vessels with basic shield generators bolted on. Sarah looked up from her tablet, but said nothing. She simply nodded once and returned to her notes. Zektar spread his arms wide, activating a new holographic display. Here is our battle plan, he announced proudly. The display showed the Kepler Nexus system, a strategic choke point between Coalition space and Devourer territory. We will mass our fleets here and force them into a decisive engagement. The preliminary assault will be handled by our expendable forces, he continued, highlighting several red dots on the map. The human colonies here, here, and here will serve as bait to draw out their main fleet. Once the Devourers commit to attacking these worthless worlds, our real forces will strike from behind. The room erupted in approving sounds. The Vorthak Empire's battle doctrine was famous throughout the galaxy. Use the weak to expose the strong, then crush both with overwhelming force. It had worked for them across dozens of campaigns. Sarah finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear in the sudden silence that followed. That won't work. Every head in the room turned toward her. Zektar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. The little human finally speaks, he said. Please enlighten us with your vast military wisdom. Sarah met his gaze steadily. The Devourers don't think like you do. They don't get angry when colonies are threatened. They calculate resources and efficiency. Using our colonies as bait will only feed them more biomass while telling them exactly where your real fleet is positioned. High Admiral Kixthul's tentacles curled dismissively. Human, your species has been fighting wars for what? 10,000 years? My people have been waging stellar campaigns since before your son was born. Do you really think you understand tactics better than we do? I think I understand the enemy better than you do, Sarah replied calmly. But please continue with your plan. The insult was subtle but unmistakable. General Vex stood up from his chair, his massive frame towering over the table. You dare suggest that we don't understand our enemy? We have been fighting the Devourer swarms for 3 standard years. And losing, Sarah added quietly, making another note on her tablet. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Several delegates made threatening gestures or sounds. The Keth representatives creaked ominously, their branch-like arms rustling. Even the normally calm Zenthari showed signs of agitation, with Kixthul's water tank bubbling more rapidly. Commander Zektar raised one of his arms for silence. Perhaps the human would like to share her superior strategy with us? His tone was mocking, clearly expecting her to back down. Sarah looked around the room at all the hostile faces and glowing eyes focused on her. She was outnumbered, outranked, and representing a species that most of these beings considered barely more advanced than animals. Any reasonable person would apologize and stay quiet. Instead, she stood up and walked to the holographic display. Her small human hands moved through the light projections, manipulating the star map with practiced ease. "The Devourers aren't where you think they are," she said, highlighting several systems that the Coalition intelligence had marked as empty space. "They've been using quantum displacement technology to hide their real fleet positions." "Impossible," scoffed the Nexus representative, its electronic voice crackling with static. "Our sensors would detect quantum displacement signatures." "Not if they're using organic quantum fields," Sarah replied. "Living ships that exist partially outside normal space-time. We've detected the gravitational echoes, but your sensors are calibrated for mechanical signatures." She manipulated the display again, showing a complex pattern of movement that the Coalition had missed entirely. "They're not massing for a direct assault. They're surrounding us. Your battle plan will put our entire fleet in a trap." The room fell silent for a moment as the implications sank in. Then General Vex laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Quantum biology? Organic displacement fields? This is fantasy, not tactics. The human watches too many entertainment programs." Other delegates joined in with their species' versions of laughter. The Vorthak clicked their mandibles, the Zenthari made high-pitched whistling sounds, and the Keth rustled their branches dismissively. Sarah closed the display and returned to her seat without another word. She picked up her tablet and resumed making notes, ignoring the continued mockery from the other representatives. "Well," Commander Zektar announced with satisfaction, "I think we can proceed with the real planning now that the entertainment portion is over." For the next 2 hours, the Coalition delegates refined their battle plan. They discussed fleet positioning, supply lines, and communication protocols. They argued about which species would have the honor of delivering the killing blow to the Devourer fleet. They planned their victory celebration and discussed how to divide the conquered territories. Through it all, Sarah Chen sat quietly in her corner, occasionally glancing up from her tablet to observe the proceedings. She watched as they finalized the details of what they were convinced would be the greatest military victory in galactic history. When the session finally ended, the delegates filed out of the chamber in high spirits, already composing the reports they would send to their home worlds about the coming triumph. Sarah was the last to leave, gathering her simple tablet and walking toward the door. As she passed Commander Zektar, he looked down at her with his compound eyes. "Human," he said, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been pity. "When this war is over and we have saved your species from extinction, perhaps your people will learn to show proper gratitude to their superiors." Sarah paused at the door and looked back at him. "Perhaps," she said quietly. "Or perhaps you'll learn to listen." She left the chamber without waiting for a response, her footsteps echoing softly in the corridor as she disappeared into the ship's maze of passages, leaving behind the confident voices of beings who were absolutely certain they knew everything about war. They had no idea what they had just dismissed, the human's warning. 3 days before the Coalition's planned offensive, Sarah Chen walked through the crystalline corridors of the Dominion's Pride toward High Admiral Kixthul's private chambers. The ship's artificial gravity felt strange under her feet. It was calibrated for species much larger than humans, making each step feel like she was walking on a trampoline. She carried a sealed case in her hands, the metal container looking ordinary despite the extraordinary contents within. Her request for a private meeting had surprised the Admiral's staff. Humans rarely asked for individual audiences, and when they did, it was usually to beg for additional resources or protection for their vulnerable colonies. The Admiral's chamber was a marvel of Zenthari engineering. The walls were made of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light, creating patterns that shifted like slow-moving water. In the center of the room sat a massive tank filled with the high-pressure, oxygen-rich fluid that the Xanthari needed to survive outside their home. World's crushing atmosphere. Admiral Quixthul floated in the tank, his boneless body undulating gracefully as his tentacles moved in complex patterns that served as both communication and thought process for his species. His translator, a small device attached to the tank's exterior, converted his biochemical signals into galactic standard speech. "Captain Chen," the Admiral's synthesized voice carried a tone of mild curiosity. "This is unexpected. I trust there are no problems with your species' preparations for the coming battle?" Sarah set her case on the crystal table beside the tank. "There are problems, Admiral, but not with our preparations." She opened the case, revealing a collection of data chips, star charts, and what appeared to be organic samples preserved in specialized containers. Quixthul's compound eyes focused on the materials with interest. "I've spent the last 6 months analyzing every piece of intelligence we have about the Devourers," Sarah began, activating a small holographic projector. The space above the table filled with detailed tactical displays and biological scans. "Your War Council's strategy has 17 critical flaws." The Admiral's tentacles stilled in what Sarah recognized as surprise. 17? That seems excessive. "It's conservative," Sarah replied calmly. She manipulated the hologram, highlighting supply routes and fleet positions. "Your supply lines assume the Devourers will engage in standard orbital combat, but look at these biological samples we recovered from the Theta colonies." She held up one of the containers, showing what looked like a piece of living metal that seemed to shift and flow even in stasis. "This isn't ship hull material. It's a living organism that can exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. The Devourers aren't building ships, they're growing them. And these ships can move through space in ways that our physics models don't account for." Quixthul's tentacles began moving again, this time in the rapid patterns that indicated deep thought. "Explain." Sarah activated another display, showing energy signatures that defied conventional understanding. "They think in 4 dimensions, Admiral. While we plan battles on a flat tactical plane, they're moving through folded space-time. Watch these energy readings from the last 3 encounters." The hologram showed Coalition fleets firing at empty space, while Devourer bioships materialized behind them, inside their formations, sometimes even inside their ships. It wasn't teleportation or faster-than-light travel. It was movement through dimensions that most species couldn't even perceive, let alone navigate. "Your battle plan assumes they'll meet our fleet head-on at the Kepler Nexus," Sarah continued. "But they're already there. They've been positioning bioships in quantum shadows around the system for weeks. When your fleet arrives, it won't be jumping into a battle. It'll be jumping into a slaughter." The Admiral's tentacles had gone completely still now, a sign of either deep concentration or significant alarm. Sarah couldn't tell which. She activated a final display, showing a 3-dimensional map of Coalition space with red markers scattered throughout. "They're not planning to fight us system by system. They're going to hit every major population center simultaneously while our fleet is trapped at Kepler. By the time any survivors make it back, there won't be a coalition left to save." The silence stretched for several minutes. Quixthul's translator occasionally crackled with partial words, as the Admiral processed what he was seeing. Finally, he spoke. "These readings, how did you obtain them?" "Careful observation," Sarah replied. "And some unconventional detection methods." "Impossible. Our sensor arrays are the most advanced in known space. If such readings existed, we would have detected them." Sarah closed the holographic display and looked directly at the Admiral through the crystal wall of his tank. "With respect, sir, your sensor arrays are designed to detect the technology you understand. You're looking for metal ships with fusion drives and quantum computers. You're not looking for living vessels that exist partially outside normal space-time." The Admiral's tentacles curled in what Sarah recognized as dismissive gesture. "Captain, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but you're asking me to believe that a young species like humanity has detected something that has escaped the attention of civilizations thousands of years more advanced. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that advancement and understanding aren't the same thing," Sarah replied. "Sometimes a fresh perspective can see things that experience has taught you to ignore." She reached into her case and pulled out a final data chip. Here's an alternative strategy. It accounts for their dimensional mobility and uses their own tactics against them. Instead of massing our fleet for a decisive battle, we scatter into small mobile units and force them to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously. Kixthul accepted the chip with one of his tentacles, sliding it into a reader built into his tank. His eyes scanned the data while his other tentacles moved in rapid calculation patterns. After several minutes, he spoke again. This strategy would require abandoning 3 systems to create the necessary dispersal pattern. The political cost would be enormous. The alternative is losing everything, Sarah said quietly. The Admiral's tentacles stilled again. When he finally responded, his tone carried the weight of centuries of military command. Captain Chen, I have been fighting wars since before your species discovered fire. I have commanded fleets that conquered entire galactic sectors. Do you honestly believe that a species as young as humanity can instruct beings like us on the nature of warfare? Sarah had expected this response. She'd heard variations of it from every species in the coalition. Age equaled wisdom. Experience equaled superiority. And humans were children playing with weapons they didn't understand. I believe, she said carefully, that sometimes the student sees things the teacher has forgotten how to notice. Your species has been space-capable for less than a century, the Admiral continued, his voice taking on a lecturing tone. We have been waging stellar warfare for millennia. Your entire military history spans perhaps 10,000 years. We have records of campaigns that lasted longer than your civilization has existed. Sarah nodded politely. And in all that time, have you ever encountered an enemy like the Devourers? The question hung in the crystal chamber like a challenge. Kixthul's tentacles writhed in patterns Sarah couldn't interpret, but his translator remained silent. I thought not, she said, closing her case. Thank you for your time, Admiral. I hope you'll at least consider the possibility that this enemy requires new thinking, not old experience. She turned to leave, but the Admiral's voice stopped her. Captain, even if your analysis has merit, and I'm not saying it does, the political realities make any change in strategy impossible. The other species would never accept tactical advice from humans. The Vorthak Empire alone would withdraw from the coalition rather than follow a battle plan designed by what they consider a primitive species. Sarah looked back at him, her expression calm but her eyes hard. Then I hope your pride is worth the lives of everyone in coalition space. She left the Admiral's chamber without waiting for a response, walking back through the crystalline corridors toward the human quarters. Behind her, she could hear the faint humming of Zenthari thought patterns as Kixthul processed their conversation. That night, alone in her small quarters, Sarah activated a secure communication array. The message she composed was brief and coded, but its meaning was clear to anyone who knew how to read it. Sol Command, this is Falcon. The Coalition has rejected all warnings. Enemy capabilities confirmed beyond initial estimates. Execute protocol. 7 immediately. Do not trust Coalition leadership. Do not rely on Coalition support. We are on our own. She encrypted the message with keys that would take the Coalition's computers thousands of years to break, then sent it through channels that didn't officially exist. By the time it reached Earth, her government would understand that humanity's survival depended on plans that none of their allies knew existed. As she prepared for sleep, Sarah looked out her small porthole at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, the Devourer fleet was preparing for a battle that would reshape the galaxy. The Coalition's leaders were confident in their coming victory, secure in their ancient wisdom and superior technology. Rivers of blood, the Coalition fleet emerged from hyperspace at the Kepler Nexus in perfect formation, 30,000 warships representing the combined military might of 12 species. The sight would have been breathtaking to any observer. Massive Vorthak dreadnoughts bristling with weapons, elegant Zenthari cruisers that moved like schools of metallic fish, towering Keth bioships that looked like flying trees, and the geometric perfection of Nexus battle platforms. Commander Zektar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the tactical displays with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Long-range sensors showed empty space where the Devourer fleet should have been waiting, which meant their enemies were either hiding or had fled entirely. Cowards, he muttered, his mandibles clicking with disdain. They know they cannot face the might of the Coalition in open battle. High Admiral Quickthul's voice crackled over the communication system from his command ship. All fleet commanders maintain formation and advance toward the primary objective. Keep your sensors active for any sign of enemy movement. The massive fleet began moving through the system, their engines lighting up the darkness with brilliant blue flames. Every captain was confident. Every crew member knew they were part of something historic. This would be the battle that ended the Devourer threat forever. They had been advancing for exactly 17 minutes when space itself began to tear open around them. The first sign was a strange ripple in the fabric of reality, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Then the ripples began to expand, and through them came something that should not have existed. The Devourer bioships emerged not from hyperspace, but from dimensional folds that bent space-time like origami. They materialized inside the Coalition. Formation, their living hulls pulsing with organic light as they shed the quantum shadows they had been hiding in. These were not the crude bioships the Coalition had fought before. These vessels were art and horror combined, their surfaces flowing like liquid while maintaining the hardness of neutronium. They moved with impossible grace, sliding between dimensions as easily as fish swimming through water. Commander Zektar's first warning was when his bridge's main display simply went black. Not destroyed, not jammed, just black, as if the sensors were trying to process something they weren't designed to understand. "Report!" he barked, but his tactical officer was staring at readings that made no sense. "Sir, I'm detecting enemy ships, but they're inside our formation. They're everywhere." The truth hit the Coalition fleet like a tsunami of realization. They hadn't jumped into a battle. They had jumped into a trap that had been waiting for them in dimensions they couldn't perceive. The slaughter began immediately. A Zenthari heavy cruiser simply ceased to exist as a Devourer bioship materialized. Inside its hull, the organic vessel growing through the metal structure like a deadly cancer. The cruiser's death scream was broadcast across all frequencies, a sound of tearing metal and dying biologics that would haunt the survivors forever. Vorthak dreadnoughts, the pride of the Empire's fleet, found their weapons firing at empty space, while enemy vessels attacked them from angles that geometry said shouldn't exist. Their heavy plasma cannons, capable of cracking planets, passed harmlessly through targets that existed in multiple dimensional states at once. The Keth bioships, living vessels that had served their species for thousands of years, writhed in agony as Devourer organisms infected their hulls and turned them against their own creators. Massive tree ships that had weathered countless battles began consuming their own crews, their organic systems hijacked by parasites that understood biological warfare better than any species in the galaxy. General Vex of the Thrakari watched in horror from his command deck as his escort fleet disappeared around him. His ship's energy shields, designed to stop any known weapon, offered no protection against creatures that could reach through dimensional barriers to tear hulls apart from the inside. "All units, fall back," he ordered, but there was nowhere to retreat to. The Devourers had surrounded them in four-dimensional space, attacking from directions that didn't exist in normal physics. High Admiral Quickthul's flagship was among the first major casualties. The Eternal Tide, a masterpiece of Zenthari engineering, shuddered as something impossible happened to its hull. The molecular bonds holding the ship together simply stopped working, and the massive vessel began to fall apart at the atomic level. Quickthul's final transmission was calm, despite the chaos around him. "All ships, this is High Admiral Quickthul. The enemy capabilities exceed all projections. They are using dimensional warfare techniques unknown to our science. I repeat, they can attack from..." His voice cut off as his command ship dissolved into its component atoms. The space around Kepler Nexus was turning red. Not the red of engine flames or weapon discharges, but the actual red of blood from a dozen different species. The Devourers weren't just destroying ships. They were harvesting them, converting crew members into biomass while the vessels were still fighting. Vorthak blood, thick and black, mixed with the silver fluid that served as Zenthari life essence. The crystalline fragments of shattered Keth hulls reflected the light of dying stars, while the mechanical components of Nexus units drifted through the carnage like metallic snow. Commander Zektar, his mighty dreadnought now reduced to a drifting wreck, made one final attempt to understand what was happening. His ship's dying computer systems managed to get a clear scan of a nearby Devourer vessel, and what he saw in his last moments redefined his understanding of the universe. The bioship wasn't just alive, it was thinking. Its hull rippled with neural patterns that processed information faster than quantum computers. Its weapons weren't firing energy or projectiles. They were sending targeted reality distortions that unraveled matter at the quantum level. "Impossible," he whispered. But his words were lost as his ship's life support failed and the vacuum of space claimed him. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted less than 2 hours. Of the 30,000 ships that had jumped into the AD system with such confidence, fewer than 3,000 managed to escape. Most of those were severely damaged, their hulls scarred by weapons that shouldn't have been able to touch them, their crews traumatized by encounters with an enemy that operated outside the known laws of physics. The survivors' reports, transmitted back to Coalition space on emergency channels, painted a picture of devastation that none of the homeworlds wanted to believe. Entire fleets wiped out by creatures that could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Ships destroyed by weapons that attacked the fundamental forces holding matter together. Crews harvested by organisms that converted living beings into resources while keeping them conscious throughout the process. Admiral Thexka of the Rim Defense Force, monitoring the battle from a safe distance, watched the carnage through long range, sensors with growing horror. Her voice shaking, she transmitted the final casualty report to Coalition Command. Total fleet strength, destroyed. Confirmed losses, 27,000 vessels. Crew casualties, estimated 93%. The enemy demonstrated capabilities that exceed our understanding of physics. They were not fighting a battle. They were conducting a harvest. As the last Coalition ships limped away from Kepler, Nexus, the space they left behind, had become a monument to the price of arrogance. Rivers of blood from dozens of species drifted through the void like crimson nebulae, each droplet containing the hopes and dreams of civilizations that had thought themselves superior. The debris field stretched for millions of kilometers, a graveyard of twisted metal and organic matter that would take centuries to fully catalog. Among the wreckage floated the remnants of weapons that were supposed to be invincible, shields that were supposed to be impenetrable, and armor that was supposed to protect the finest warriors in the galaxy. But perhaps the most chilling sight was not what remained, but what was missing. The Devourer fleet had vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving behind only the evidence of their overwhelming victory. They had proven their point and withdrawn, confident that the message had been received. The message was simple. The Coalition's military might meant nothing. Their ancient wisdom was worthless. Their superior technology was primitive compared to beings that had mastered the art of existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. In one devastating engagement, the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted permanently. The Coalition that had once ruled over hundreds of star systems now faced the reality that they were prey, not predators. And somewhere in the wreckage drifting through space, a single emergency beacon continued to broadcast a message that no one wanted to hear. Where are the humans? Why didn't the humans come? The question would haunt the survivors for days to come, but the answer was already on its way. Deep in space, moving toward the battlefield at speeds that defied conventional physics, a fleet of ships unlike anything in the known galaxy was approaching. The humans had not abandoned their allies. They had simply been waiting for the right moment to reveal what they really were, the human fleet. 3 days after the massacre at Kepler Nexus, the surviving Coalition ships were limping back to their home systems, their hulls scarred and their crews broken. The proud fleets that had departed with such confidence now struggled. To maintain basic formation, many vessels held together by emergency repairs and sheer determination. Captain Veltar of the damaged Vorthak cruiser Iron Resolve was monitoring long-range sensors when something impossible appeared on his displays. At first, he thought his equipment was malfunctioning. The readings showed massive energy signatures approaching from the direction of human space, moving at speeds that should have torn any known ship apart. "Communications officer," he clicked. In his native tongue, "Are you detecting any transmissions from the approaching contacts?" "Negative, sir. But the energy signatures are unusual. These readings don't match any known Coalition vessel types." Veltar studied the data with growing confusion. Whatever was approaching was huge. The sensor returns suggested ships larger than Vorthak dreadnoughts, but moving with the agility of fighter craft. More disturbing was the way they seemed to phase in and out of normal space, appearing on sensors, for moments before vanishing entirely. "Could these be more Devourer ships?" asked his tactical officer, the fear clear in his voice. Before Veltar could answer, space itself seemed to fold, and the approaching fleet materialized around the Coalition survivors. But these were not the organic horror ships they had faced at Kepler. These vessels were something entirely different. The human fleet that emerged from hyperspace looked nothing like the crude ships the Coalition had seen before. These vessels were sleek and predatory, their hulls seeming to shift and adapt as they moved through space. They were clearly technological rather than biological, but they moved with a fluid grace that suggested something between machine and living creature. The flagship was the most impressive of all. Nearly 2 kilometers long, it resembled no human design on record. Its hull appeared to be made of a material that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, making the ship look like a hole in space itself. Along its sides, geometric patterns pulsed with soft blue light, creating designs that hurt to look at directly. Captain Veltar's communications system crackled to life with a transmission on Coalition emergency frequencies. The voice that came through was calm, professional, and unmistakably human. "Coalition survivors, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force aboard the flagship Quiet Vengeance. We are assuming battlefield command. All damaged vessels will form up on our position for escort back to safe space." The Coalition survivors stared at their displays in amazement. The readings they were getting from the human ships defied everything they thought they knew about physics. These vessels were clearly more advanced than anything in Coalition space, their technology so far beyond current understanding that the sensors could barely process what they were detecting. "Admiral Chen," Captain Veltar transmitted, his voice shaking with confusion and exhaustion. We were not expecting human reinforcements. Your fleet appears to be using technology we don't recognize." Sarah's response came immediately, her tone carrying the quiet authority of someone who had been in command far longer than her apparent age would suggest. "Captain, there's quite a bit about human capabilities that the Coalition hasn't learned yet. We'll discuss that later. Right now, my priority is getting your survivors to safety." As the human fleet moved into formation around the damaged Coalition ships, the alien crews got their first close look at vessels that shouldn't have existed. The human ships didn't just use unknown technology, they seemed to bend the fundamental laws of physics around themselves. On the bridge of the Quiet Vengeance, Sarah Chen stood before a command interface that looked like a fusion of technology and art. The ship's controls responded to her thoughts as much as her actions, and the displays around her showed information in ways that would have been impossible with conventional computers. Her first officer, Commander Jackson Torres, approached with a report. "Admiral, the Coalition survivors are in worse shape than we expected. Most of their ships are barely spaceworthy, and crew casualties are massive. They're asking questions about our fleet composition and technical specifications." Sarah nodded without taking her eyes off the tactical display. "Standard protocol, Commander. Give them our registry information and basic capabilities only. They're not ready for the full briefing yet." "Understood. Ma'am, should we also inform them about the nature of our alliance?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching as her ships effortlessly maintained formation around vessels that were struggling to stay in one piece. "Not yet. They've had enough shocks for one day. Let's get them somewhere safe first." The journey back to Coalition space was a revelation for the alien survivors. They watched in amazement as the human ships performed maneuvers that should have been impossible, phasing partially out of normal space to avoid obstacles or adjust course without affecting their passengers. The human vessel's defensive capabilities became apparent when a small group of Devourer scouts attempted to attack the convoy. The engagement lasted exactly 47 seconds. The Devourer bioships that had seemed so terrifyingly advanced during the massacre at Kepler suddenly looked primitive compared to what the human fleet brought to bear. The Quiet Vengeance alone dispatched 3 enemy vessels without firing a single visible weapon, the bioships simply ceasing to exist as if they had never been there at all. Captain Veltar watched the brief engagement through his damaged sensors, trying to understand what he was seeing. "Communications. Did you detect any weapon signatures from the human ships?" Negative, sir. No energy discharges, no projectiles, no identifiable attack patterns. The enemy vessels just stopped existing. The implications were staggering. The Coalition's most advanced weapons had been useless against the Devourers, but the humans had eliminated them without apparent effort, using technology that didn't register on any known sensors. As they approached the outer systems of Coalition space, Sarah finally opened a general communication channel to all the survivor ships. Her image appeared on every functioning display, and the aliens got their first good look at the woman who commanded this impossible fleet. She looked exactly the same as she had during the War Council aboard the Dominion's Pride, small, unremarkable, wearing a simple uniform that seemed plain compared to the ornate regalia preferred by other species. But her eyes held a depth that hadn't been there before, as if she had seen things that changed her understanding of the universe itself. "Coalition survivors," she began, her voice carrying across space to reach crews who had lost hope of ever seeing their homes again. "I know you have questions about what you've witnessed today. I know our capabilities seem impossible compared to what you've seen from humanity before." She paused, looking directly into the camera with an expression that was both sad and determined. "The truth is, there's quite a bit about my species that we haven't shared with the Coalition. Not out of deception, but because we weren't sure you were ready to learn it." On dozens of ships, alien crews listened with rapt attention as the human they had dismissed as primitive continued speaking. "The predecessors, the beings who ruled this galaxy before any of our current civilizations existed, they didn't disappear. They've been waiting, watching, preparing for a threat that they knew would eventually come. The Devourers aren't new to this galaxy. They've been here before, and the predecessors fought them once already." Sarah's words sent shockwaves through the listening crews. The predecessors were legend, mythical beings that some species believed had seeded the galaxy with life before vanishing into history. The idea that they still existed was beyond most aliens' ability to comprehend. "When humanity was first contacted by Coalition scouts, it wasn't an accident," Sarah continued. "The predecessors had been monitoring our development for thousands of years, waiting to see if we had the qualities they needed. When the Devourer threat returned, they chose us to be their successors." Captain Veltar found his voice, transmitting on the general channel. "Admiral, are you claiming that humans have been in contact with predecessor technology? That's impossible. No species has ever found working predecessor artifacts." Sarah's expression didn't change. "No species has ever been chosen to receive them. The predecessors don't leave their technology lying around for anyone to find. They select their inheritors very carefully, and they chose us." She gestured, and the view shifted to show the exterior of her flagship. As the Coalition survivors watched, the ship's hull began to shift and change, revealing underlying structures that were clearly not of human origin. The geometric patterns that had been pulsing along its sides suddenly made sense. They weren't decorative elements, but control interfaces for technology that operated on principles beyond current understanding. "Every ship in this fleet is a fusion of human engineering and predecessor science," Sarah explained. "We've spent the last 5 years learning to use their gifts, preparing for the day when the Devourers would reveal themselves fully. Today is that day." Commander Torres approached. Sarah's position, his expression grim. "The reckoning." The final battle did not take place in normal space. It could not take place in normal space because the Devourer fleet existed primarily in the dimensional folds between realities, where the laws of physics bent like warm plastic, and thought became as real as matter. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Quiet Vengeance as her ship prepared to enter the quantum realm where the true Devourer fleet had been hiding. Around her, displays showed readouts that would have been meaningless to any other species: dimensional coordinates, quantum field fluctuations, and reality stability measurements that tracked how much their presence was affecting the fundamental structure of the universe. "All ships report ready for dimensional translation," Commander Torres announced, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. "Predecessor guidance systems are online and responding." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with commanding forces that could reshape reality itself. The human fleet had grown since their rescue of the Coalition survivors. Ships that had been hidden in quantum shadows throughout human space had emerged, revealing a naval force that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. These were not the crude vessels that humanity had shown to the Coalition. These ships were living partnerships between human engineering and predecessor science, vessels that existed partially outside normal space-time and could navigate the dimensional maze where the Devourers made their home. "Begin translation," Sarah ordered. Reality twisted around the human fleet as they slipped sideways through dimensions that had no names in any galactic language. For a moment that lasted eternity, and an eternity that lasted a moment, they existed everywhere and nowhere, their consciousness expanding to touch the fundamental forces that held the universe together. Then they emerged into the Devourer realm, and Sarah saw the true scope of the threat they faced. The space around them was not space at all, but a living void that pulsed with malevolent intelligence. Floating in this impossible realm were bioships beyond counting, not the few hundred vessels that had attacked the Coalition, but millions of them, each one the size of a moon and bristling with weapons that could unmake matter at the quantum level. At the center of this nightmare fleet was something that defied description. It was part ship, part creature, part force of nature, an entity so vast that its presence warped space-time around itself. This was the Devourer Queen Mind, the collective consciousness that commanded their species and had consumed entire galaxies before setting its attention on the Milky Way. The moment the human fleet appeared, every Devourer bioship turned toward them with the coordinated precision of a single organism. In normal space, this would have been the moment when the humans were overwhelmed by sheer numbers, but this was not normal space, and humanity was no longer bound by normal limitations. Sarah's voice carried across the quantum foam to every ship in her fleet. "All vessels, you are cleared to engage. Show them what the predecessors' children have learned." What followed was not a battle in any conventional sense. It was a dance of destruction that took place across multiple dimensions simultaneously, with ships phasing in and out of reality as they maneuvered for advantage in spaces that existed between thoughts. The human vessels moved like living things, their hulls flowing and adapting as they navigated the twisted geometry of the Devourer realm. But they were not just adapting to the environment. They were controlling it, using predecessor technology to manipulate the fundamental forces that the Devourers relied on for their advantage. A Devourer bioship, larger than most space stations, found itself suddenly isolated in a pocket of normal space as human vessels rewrote the local laws of physics around it. Cut off from the quantum fields that gave it power, the massive creature became vulnerable to weapons that operated on principles it couldn't defend against. The quiet vengeance itself became something more than a ship as Sarah merged her consciousness with the predecessor guidance systems. The vessel became an extension of her will, moving through impossible angles to strike at enemies that existed in multiple dimensions at once. Its weapons didn't fire energy or projectiles. They fired concepts, ideas given physical form that unraveled the quantum structures holding the bioships together. But the true horror of the battle was not in the destruction of individual ships. It was in the systematic dismantling of the Devourer fleet's ability to exist in folded space at all. The humans weren't just fighting the enemy, they were rewriting the rules of engagement in real time, forcing a species that had dominated dimensional warfare for millions of years to fight on human terms. Captain Marcus Webb, commanding the destroyer Silent Hunter, watched through his ship's quantum sensors as a cluster of Devourer vessels simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not defeated, erased from reality so completely that they had never been there at all. "Jesus," he whispered, "we're not just killing them, we're editing them out of existence." The Devourer Queen Mind, ancient beyond comprehension and powerful enough to crack stars with its thoughts, finally understood what it was facing. These were not the simple three-dimensional beings it had expected to harvest. These were inheritors of the predecessors, the race that had driven the Devourers from this galaxy eons ago when the universe was young. The Queen Mind's psychic scream echoed across dimensions as it realized that its species' long exile was about to become permanent. It gathered its remaining forces for a final assault. pouring all of its accumulated power into one devastating attack that would either destroy the human fleet or tear apart the fabric of space-time itself. Sarah felt the attack building, like a storm made of pure hatred and hunger. The Queen Mind was preparing to unleash forces that could unravel entire star systems, and even predecessor technology had limits to what it could withstand. But Sarah had one more card to play. "All ships, prepare for synchronized quantum displacement," she ordered. "We're going to do something that's never been attempted before." Across the human fleet, predecessor guidance systems came online simultaneously, their combined power reaching into the deepest levels of reality. What happened next violated every known law of physics and several that hadn't been discovered yet. The human fleet didn't just move through space, they moved through time itself, appearing at the exact moment and location where the Queen Mind's attack would be most vulnerable. They existed in the past, present, and future simultaneously, striking from temporal angles that the Devourers couldn't perceive or defend against. The Queen Mind's final attack met the combined firepower of humanity's fleet across multiple timelines, and the collision between unstoppable force and immovable object created something new in the universe. A cascade failure in the quantum substrate that supported the Devourer realm. The bioships that had seemed so terrifyingly alive began to wither and die as the dimensional fields that sustained them collapsed. Millions of vessels that had terrorized galaxies for eons simply faded away like shadows at sunrise, their existence becoming a half-remembered nightmare. The Queen Mind itself, the ancient intelligence that had commanded the Devourer swarms since before most stars were born, felt its consciousness fragmenting as the quantum foundations of its being were systematically dismantled. Its final thought was a recognition of the impossible. It was being defeated by descendants of the prey species it had come to harvest. As the last of the Devourer bioships dissolved into quantum foam, Sarah felt the predecessor guidance systems powering down around her. The battle was over, but the victory had come at a cost. The human fleet had pushed the boundaries of what was possible, and some of those boundaries would never be the same again. "Damage report," she requested, though she already knew the answer. "Minimal physical damage to the fleet," Commander Torres replied. "But our quantum signature has been permanently altered. We've crossed a threshold, Admiral. We can't go back to what we were before." Sarah nodded, understanding the implications. Humanity had become something new in this battle, something that belonged more to the realm of the predecessors than to the galaxy of ordinary matter and energy. They had saved civilization, but they were no longer entirely part of it. The human fleet translated back to normal space, emerging near the ruins of Kepler Nexus where the Coalition's defeat had begun. But now, the space was filled with the scattered remnants of the Devourer forces that had been attacking Coalition worlds. Bioships that had simply stopped functioning when their connection to the Queen Mind was severed. Across Coalition space, the attacks that had been devastating entire worlds suddenly ceased. Devourer bioships that had been in the process of consuming cities went dormant, their organic hulls becoming inert matter that would eventually be reclaimed by the planets they had threatened. The war was over, but the galaxy that emerged from it was forever changed. Sarah's final transmission was broadcast to every world in Coalition space, reaching beings who had given up hope of survival and were now struggling to understand their salvation. "People of the Coalition," she began, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen the fundamental structure of reality and returned to tell about it. "The Devourer threat has been neutralized permanently.